factory open. So if your raw material is now was coming from China and no longer can get it, what are the alternative sources? You know, what can be
essential items? I think it says food, but I'm saying
for your sector to help you to continue to do your business.
Price is dropping on the market today. That
And it's been removed. The enterprise was followed up by that.
To each other in terms of when we have this issue.
Provide epilepsy to the rest of the world. So we know the situation on hand, but today we all have gathered.
It was really interesting. I was reading an article a few days ago that did an analysis, a comparative analysis between the response of the world to the global financial crisis in 2008 and the response of the world to this COVID-19 situation. And what it was saying was that in 2008, the response by the leading countries from an economic financial perspective, you have the G7s, the G20s, etc., the leaders at that point in time were able to all congregate together and map out a game plan in respect of how they're going to tackle the financial ramifications of what had happened through the GFC. And they in fact had a game plan, and they all stuck to the game plan. This time around, instead of multilateralism, there's unilateralism. Individual countries are doing their own thing. Of course, USA is a completely different ship altogether. You have now, of course, the different countries like China and Europe, etc., are doing all their own thing. So there is no unified approach to this particular situation that we are currently facing, which of course then creates a lot more instability, lack of direction, if you like, from a global perspective, and then that filters down at a regional perspective. And those countries that are very much on the periphery of the global financial system are again very much left on their own because there's a lack of direction from the top, so to speak. So that is one of the sort of the telling points, or in comparison to what happened then and what is happening now. As you also know that, as I was mentioning to somebody the other day, that the tourism sector in Fiji contributes, depending on the figures, 36 to 30% towards our GDP. Now, the number of visitors that come to Fiji are approximately 850,000 visitors to Fiji at this point in time. Now, however, that constitutes 36-38% of the GDP. In Australia, there are literally millions of tourists that come to Australia. However, as a percentage of contribution to their GDP is much lower than us. So the impact on us is far greater in respect of, impact on our economy is far greater if the tourism sector actually completely dries up or dries down to a trickle. That's the point we have to understand. And the reality, of course, now is that our two largest source markets, Australia and New Zealand, have placed a number of restrictions in respect of their citizens traveling. The New Zealand, of course, position is a bit more liberal, if you like, because they have said that any Kiwi citizen traveling to any part of the world except the Pacific has to go into self-isolation upon return to New Zealand, 14 days. However, if a Kiwi, for example, traveling to Fiji for a holiday, upon their return to New Zealand does not have to go into self-isolation unless, of course, they display symptoms of COVID-19. So that's the difference, and that's a saving grace. But the fact that they made those announcements, and the fact that Australia has not made an exception for the Pacific, and Australia contributes approximately 50 to 51% of our total arrivals, means a huge sort of impact on us. Australia, followed by New Zealand, and then of course North America, in particular USA. Now again, there's a number of statistics coming out of USA. It does not seem to be, very stable statistics, depending on who you talk to, depending which person in the authorities, from the US authorities, are actually giving out the information. So it's an unknown situation. I mean, compared to, say, Singapore, Singapore, of course, was initially one of the countries outside China that actually had people with COVID-19, but there's been, interestingly, no deaths in Singapore. And they have managed to, handle the situation quite well. Of course, it's a country slightly bigger than Tavyuni. One may argue that it's a lot easier to do that. It's a city-state. But the reality of the matter is that that same kind of approach has not been taken in other larger economies like USA. So it is unknown to us. So we have to understand that if you have a sector that's going to be directly impacted upon, that has an enormous ramification for our economic growth and of course economic impact in terms of foreign reserves, etc. The other, I think, point of difference, of course, is that we have to understand that for Fiji Airways, for example, the Fiji Guarantee product that has been launched, which includes, I don't know how many of you know about it, I think there's about 32 to 35 hotel properties are now working together with Fiji Airways to offer some fantastic deals. And they've managed to keep the yields relatively reasonable. There's been no slashing of the yields, as we've seen in other jurisdictions where they have done that. So the yields are relatively stable, but you can get some fantastic deals where you get very good return airfares combined with accommodation. Children can come in free because we have primarily our hospitality industry is focused on the family market. Children can come in free, children's meals are free, other types of services that they may provide, they normally say charge you 30 or 35 bucks for your kid to go and play in the children's park or nanny facilities will all be free. The great thing about it that you need to purchase it now, but you can defer your holidays many times as you like. So if I go and I am able to get accommodation at Sofitel for 900 bucks with 3 kids, and I pay for it now, but I may decide not to do it because New Zealand government has said, you may go into self-isolation, etc. So I can defer it till, next year. I can defer it in the next 18 months or defer it for the next 3 weeks, whatever the case may be. If I decide to defer it for the next 3 weeks, then come the 3rd week, I decide to defer it again, I can do it 10 times if I want. That's the attraction about that. Obviously, the reason why that's being done is because the properties and Fiji Airways can get the cash coming in. So that's in a way being creative because it helps you meet your cash flow. Businesses may actually have, mortgage payments to do, etc. So what we are saying, and I hope that this afternoon's interaction will be based on the same type of approach, where we obviously need to have a unified approach. We need to be able to think strategically. I've had some people say, why don't you just, just get rid of all the taxes and you will be fine. Well, obviously that can't be done. We need to raise revenue because on the other hand, of course, people are asking, how are we medically, are we medically sound in terms of our response to COVID-19? By the grace of God, nobody today has COVID-19 in Fiji. Now, obviously, that does not mean it will always remain the same. We're hoping it will remain the same. Now, does Fiji have the capacity? Obviously, we've taken a lot of precautionary measures. We work on a daily basis with WHO. The Minister for Health, the Permanent Secretary of Health are working with teams. We had, for example, a briefing yesterday morning at 10 a.m. at the Ministry of Health, with the WHO people present, together with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, etc. And from that, obviously, certain announcements were made by the Honourable Prime Minister in respect of stopping of the cruise liners, the fact that no civil servant can now, or permanent secretary or ministers can travel overseas, unless it's very critical, travel that's required. We have also said no more international gatherings to be held in Fiji. And the fourth is also that we won't allow any international gatherings, even though they may have some local input, but we won't allow people to come for those events. For example, as you know, in Easter weekend, the big one is the Sangam Convention. So the Sangam actually has a lot of sports tournaments, etc. These are literally thousands of Fijians, former Fijians, who come into Fiji, bring lots of money, but of course they can bring along with them certain other things that we don't want. And if they go and participate at a function, at the National Stadium, we have a few thousand people, you can very quickly get a multiplier effect in respect of the the spread of COVID-19. So, but of course, they can travel to Fiji, for a holiday. We want them to come. In fact, I just gave a radio interview to one of the radio stations in New Zealand to explain that, because some people have bought the tickets, they still want to come to Fiji. Yes, you can come, but you're not going to have that large gathering. You can go and stay at the hotel, you can rent your car, etc. But we have very stringent measures at the border. We also, the past couple of weeks, we've ordered some, thermal scanners that people can actually walk through. At the moment, it's handheld scanners in respect of taking your temperature. You have to fill out the forms. We have identified, of course, yesterday, places in the Central Division, the Western Division, and Northern Division, where people can be, put into isolated areas, in terms of monitoring them, in terms of should somebody actually have COVID-19 itself. Most of the countries actually you would see, for example, Italy, which is now I understand the worst case outside of China now, where they have actually gone into self-quarantine, self-isolation, and people actually stay in their homes because the health system just cannot cope with it at all. And as you've seen that in respect of the illness itself, it generally has a tendency to affect those over the age of 50. In particular, those who have, prior conditions, NCD type conditions, weak heart or diabetes, etc. And as you've seen, even the deaths in Australia have essentially been those predominantly, I think, over the age of 60 that have died from those deaths. I mean, I read an article where there was some talk about in Italy that they may actually not necessarily try and save people over the age of 80 anymore, because they simply cannot do that. So we have various measures and steps that have been put into place as announced by the Honourable Prime Minister. We've taken these precautionary measures, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have COVID-19 in Fiji, but we cannot take things lightly. Don't shake hands and don't do the taki or sharing the bilo, etc., because you can actually transmit it. It is actually now a real issue. And of course, we have also said, those of you who are business people, some of you may need to travel. The announcement has been made that obviously we encourage you not to do so. Please use these things. Telecommunications, very good, Skype, etc. But if you do need to travel, you need to obviously understand that upon your return, if you do show signs of symptoms, then you obviously will be asked to go into, isolation, etc. So that's part of the standard procedure now is going to be invoked. So, given all of that, by way of background, from an economic perspective, what we have been doing, over the past number of weeks, we've been talking to individual businesses and individuals and companies, etc., and looking at some very critical analysis. As you know, we've made the announcement that we're going to deliver a budget that will be delivered on the 26th of March. And the idea is to have, for in the want of a better word, whilst it's called a supplementary budget, it will in fact be a new budget setting the framework again in respect of what is happening. And that budget will last from the time it's delivered up till the end of the financial year, which is 31st of July. We, of course, will need to deliver another budget. Normally we deliver it in June or July for the full financial year. Now, I hope that this illness actually stabilizes, because if it gets out of hand, obviously it can have huge ramifications in respect of going forward. It can even have, the way it's playing out, it can even have an impact on the other budget for the new financial year. So we have to prepare ourselves for the, I'm not going to say inevitable, but prepare ourselves for things changing. Now, what we intend to do from our sessions here, we hope, Minister Kumar had facilitated another session last week with a number of key stakeholders. Some of you were there, most of you weren't there. And we had responses from the individual representatives of the different sectors as how it affected them. So, for example, I did not know that the ink that's used in the production of jerseys that we make, that we sew, put together, rugby jerseys, etc. in Fiji, actually comes from Italy. And so they were saying that now for them to get the ink out of Italy, they were charging them €3 extra per liter. So there are those kind of, more specific issues facing different sectors. Now what we want to hear from you is about your different sectors, but there may be, and we're already sort of, mulling over a number of ideas that could be applied across the board. New Zealand, for example, has announced that they will pick up the tab of people who get coronavirus or have to go into isolation, and so the employers don't actually have to pick up the tab. Of course, you have to understand Australia and New Zealand has very deep pockets, much deeper pockets than we do. So we have to live within our means, but those are some of the measures that we obviously are looking at. There are a number of other measures. We've had some discussions with the banks, how the banks can actually come to the party too in respect of this, because obviously people's businesses are affected. There's a slow turnaround, turnover is very low. Then of course their ability to, for example, repay loans, etc., may not be able to be met. So what can we do with the banks? And we hope to meet up with the banks later on this week to talk about some specific issues regarding that. So we've also had some discussions with the FNPF board chair regarding what FNPF can do. So without sort of preempting what you are going to say, I just wanted to put that by way of a background. But the point that I do want to stress is that please do not underestimate the enormity of the issue and the ramifications it can have going into the future. But it can be overcome, and as some people have said, there are also opportunities that exist within this. So if we are clever, if we are focused on the future, if we are going to work as a team, and I think we'll be able to overcome this and find a lot more opportunities. So I hope with that sort of approach, we can come out very well at the end of the wash. Thank you.
Thank you, AG. In fact, AG has provided the background.